What's going on, guys? Mitch here, and this build is getting nerfed, guaranteed. But before it does, I'd like to share it with you. So as some of you might know, I've been streaming a lot lately and showcasing this very end game, no currency budget builds. If you have infinite money, this is the build to play on stream. So I'd like to go over it with you guys. I know some of you have asked for a sort of talking head video explaining mechanics, explaining how the build works, explaining gearing and all that other stuff. So here it is. So first and foremost, let's go over the gear. A lot of people are playing Spark right now. Some people are playing Cast on Shock, Lightning Conduit. That's what this build variant is. This is a Cast on Shock Lightning Conduit variation. So Spark damage is almost entirely useless. It doesn't really matter. What you're trying to do is apply as much shock as possible to enemies so that you can take advantage of Lightning Conduit. Lightning Conduit consumes shock on enemies to deal damage, and the more shock, the more damage you deal. That's the TLDR version of how this build functions. It has things like, Archmage for tons of damage. You gain extra lightning damage based on the amount of mana you have. Conductivity, which you can use if you are still struggling on damage. I very rarely use this, but it's in the build anyway. Sigil of Power for increased damage, the good stuff. So let's go over gear. So first and foremost, your wand, arguably the most important piece of your build. Wands are very expensive because these wands are both used for Spark builds and for builds like this. So the mods you're looking for in a wand are damage is extra lightning, some form of spell damage, whether that's just % spell damage or lightning damage. A good mana roll, mine happens to be quite shit. Ideally, you want +4 or +5 level of all spell skill gems. And then for the suffixes, you have cast speed, you have int, and you have mana regen. If you're struggling on mana regen, you can opt to get mana regen here as a suffix. If you don't struggle with mana regen, feel free to get int. It's probably the best suffix when you're sort of at like the pinnacle top of this build. More int, more mana, more good. For helmets, and this generally applies to all rares aside from your ring and your amulet, you want to be looking for very high energy shield, high mana, int, and resistances. The resistances, obviously, pick resistances you need to sort of fill out the rest of your cap, but this applies to all rares. This applies for the gloves, this applies for the boots. Boots, obviously, you're sacrificing some energy shield for movement speed. Gloves are very hard to come by in the market right now, so finding a pair of gloves with good ES, good mana, good int, and double res is very difficult. You can more than likely find rares like this, which have a suffix that is probably like mana per enemy killed, crit damage bonus, etc. But yeah, look for those rares. Obviously, if you're sort of coming into this with a less than ideal budget, you can opt to sort of skimp on the tiers of mana and int and energy shield. But needless to say, that's what you're looking for. For your ring, this is probably the most important piece when you're wearing Ingenuity. You want to be looking for % lightning damage, a high mana roll, ideally T12 or T13. You want cast speed, mana regen, and int. Early on, I personally suffered with resistances, so I was carrying a lot of the burden of my resistances on this ring instead of mana regen and int. You can opt for a ring like that. Just know that you want to transition into a ring like this because your belt obviously scales this to a very high amount. So getting good rolls on your ring, very important. Of course, for the second ring, Dream Fragments, sort of unbeatable in this slot. The ability to not have to worry about being chilled or frozen is incredibly invaluable. The mana regen roll is very important. The % mana roll does not matter because it doesn't roll, right? So you just want to buy one with a good mana regen rate. And obviously the cold res as high as possible helps you sort of, it loosens the requirements your rares need for a good resistance roll. For the shield, you want to look for a Mahu Oxtal's Machination Omen Crest Shield. The only roll you care about on this is the increased effective socketed soul cores. I've been very unlucky. This was my 9th shield that I've tried to vol. So I ended up hitting 3 sockets, and it down tiered my increased effective socketed soul cores, unfortunately, but it's still usable. There are breakpoints on this shield that I've been told from a couple of very large brain chatters that matter. So I believe off the top of my head, you want to look for a 600%, a 640%, and a 650% increased effective socketed soul cores. Those are the breakpoints where it will give you, you know, a higher tier of mana. This could be entirely wrong. I'm not sure. I'm just saying in case it happens to be correct. The safest way to do this is to try and get the highest roll possible on the shield. The highest roll it can roll naturally is 666. And then vol it into 3 sockets, put some mana soul cores into it. GG. For your chest, I used to run a very high energy shield chest piece, 911 ES. I'm now using Morias, excuse me, with a corruption on the increased mana per socketed soul core. It hit 6%. The ideal scenario here is that you get a normal base and you corrupt it into 5 sockets, so you can socket 5 2% mana soul cores. That's going to lead to about a 4% more mana gain out of this than I currently have. This is cheap. You can probably find a chest like this for like 5 or 6 divines. The 5 socketed chest is more like 20 or 30. So if you're going into this with a budget, you can probably opt for a chest like this. The reason I'm taking Spirit is because obviously I don't have Spirit on my helmet anymore. I used to have it. I don't anymore. You need 170 Spirit if you want to reserve Archmage, Cast on Shock, and Clarity. If you don't care about Clarity, it's 160. And there's only a few sockets or pieces in the game you can get Spirit on. So you can get a Corruption on your helmet like this, right? You can get on a chest. You can get up to 60 on a chest. And you can get on an amulet. So, you know, dealer's choice. How you want to manage that Spirit is up to you. I personally think getting it on a prefix on an amulet is the best place because not many prefixes on amulets are too good. I would much prefer percent mana, flat mana Spirit on an amulet than having to rely on a corruption on a helmet, for instance, for my Spirit. There aren't enough corrupted Spirit, really good helmet bases on the market right now where it would warrant me changing it over this helmet, for instance. So those are your options. You can opt for a rare chest with Spirit, high energy shield, and good int with resistances. They're very expensive, you're warned. Or you can do what I've done and go for a Warriors. The ideal goal here is to get a 5 socket, like I was saying. That will lead you to have a bigger mana pool because this gives you like 35% increased mana or something. It's crazy. For the amulet, I recently crafted this. There's a video on my channel if you want to check it out. Well, crafted in quotations, but in my opinion, this is the best in slot amulet for this build. Ideally, the flat mana would have rolled higher, but, you know, crafting in this game is not really crafting, it's gambling, and I got incredibly lucky, so I am very happy with what this is. I've detailed some things in the planner that will help you determine what a good amulet is. I've listed the suffixes that matter. For prefixes, percent mana, flat mana, very important, and then, of course, Spirit if you want to get it on an amulet. If you don't, there are other things you can get, like spell damage, or flat ES, which translates to mana, not percent, flat. And then for suffixes, obviously mana regen's really nice. All attributes, very nice. Int, very nice. And of course, +3 level of all spell skills, very important. All res is great as well, helps you fill out some resistances. And then as for anoints, the 2 best anoints for this build are Frazzled on the cheap version. If you're like lacking some budget, this is great. And then you obviously want to transition into Lightning Rod when you have some more money. This is very expensive. It's about 12 divines, 13 divines right now. For the belt, of course, it's Ingenuity, highest roll possible. This just scales everything to amounts that aren't beatable by anything else. Flask, I would say this is very important. Melting Maelstrom. At this point in the build, I barely use it. I mostly use it for damage. When a boss spawns, I just tap it once, and that's it. But before you get to this point, and you're sort of, you know, struggling on mana regen, the flask is great. Keep in mind that your mana pool is also your health pool. So having mana regen where you can sustain spamming spark is really important. When you get hit by a mob, your mana is going to go down, obviously, and then you're still casting. So mana regen, keeping your mana full, very important for the build. Yeah, that's pretty much it for gear. We'll go over the passive tree and some jewels, and then I'll talk about some core mechanics of the build. So in this variation, I'm using Adorned. I've opted for a 90% roll. 100% roll, of course, is great. Anything higher than this is nice to have. I don't think it's, you know, that valuable right now. The prices are ridiculous. So a 90% roll I'm happy with. This is about 60, 70 divines. The jewels you're looking for in Adorned are going to be Shock Magnitude or magnitude of ailments. Shock magnitude rolls higher, meaning it can roll up to 20%, while ailments can roll up to 15. So you ideally want shock magnitude on a max roll, and then you want a good prefix. I would highly recommend getting a recover mana on kill magnitude jewel, at least one. The mana on kill is very nice for sustain. If you're doing simulacrums or mapping, you will notice a massive difference. You will just basically never run out of mana. And then for the additional prefixes, you want things like skill effect duration. Skill effect duration has a very high percentage roll, which means you can scale it high with adorned. Things like cast speed, you can't scale very well. We'll try to find an example here, just to show you what I mean. So I'll take this for example, right? It's recover 2% mana on kill with adorned. You're scaling that to 3%. Okay, it's better, but it's not great. The same thing applies to other mods, right? So you want to find mods that have a larger percentage roll. That means you can scale it higher with adorned. There's things like cast speed. You can get up to 4% cast speed, but again, adorned will scale that to maybe 5 or 6%. Whereas if you get skill effect duration, that scales it even higher. You get 24% increased skill effect duration instead of 13 with a 90% adorned. So yeah, crit damage bonus, we don't care. We don't care about crit at all here. It means nothing to us. We just want mana. And yeah, my perfect jewel I would recommend is skill effect duration and magnitude of shock. And then for your corruptions, look to fill out your resistances. Obviously, a higher resistance roll is great. You can get things like strength, which help a lot. It's basically getting mana, right? You don't have to take strength on your tree. If you get enough strength ones, if your resistances are fine, you can get strength, you can get dex. That'll allow you to get more int on the tree. So the passive tree will also be in the planner as well as the ascendancy. The against the darkness I've chosen is here. I'm using percent mana and fire res to cap my resistances. The best in slot against the darkness is mana and spirit. That would alleviate your spirit requirements, but they are incredibly expensive. This gives you 1% mana on each small passive. Since I'm taking all these nodes, this is the best spot for it. There's nowhere else that hits as many points as here. And yeah, that's it for jewels. Passive tree on the planner. Feel free to inspect it, look through it. Additional passive points, it's going to be very hard to get higher than like 95, 96 with the sort of content I do. So if I had the choice, I would path to another socket, maybe put another Adorn Jewel in there, maybe purchase a diamond that has +3 levels of cast on shock, or lightning conduit or spark or whatever it is. They're all very expensive and it's very hard to search for them, so I am not worried. Okay, way the build functions. So when you're generally mapping, you don't want to be holding down spark. You want to be running around and tapping spark. The movement speed penalty you incur when you spam spark is semi-influenced by cast speed, right? So think of the movement speed penalty when you're casting like a slider. The longer you hold down your mouse, it will slowly bring you to a crawl when you're moving, right? If you have high cast speed, which means in turn you can tap your mouse and you won't incur a movement speed penalty too harshly. If you have low amounts of cast speed, you will put out less sparks and you will need to hold down your mouse longer, which means you will be slowed down even more. As you can see, I'm running, I'm tapping, I'm not really slowed here. But if I hold down my mouse, all of a sudden I come to a crawl. So that's a nice way how cast speed helps with your mapping experience. I'm currently using controlled destruction here. You can use the movement speed penalty one. I don't remember what that's called. Mobility. You can put that here. I don't think it's useful. I have enough cast speed where I don't really incur that movement speed penalty too much. So when you're mapping, don't really need to do much. You can drop an Orb of Storms when you want. This applies Font of Mana, so you can get a ton of mana regen here next to it, but you don't really need it. General mapping, that's pretty much what you're doing. Just tapping one button. When you're bossing, let's assume the waypoint is the boss. You want to drop a Sigil of Power. You want to drop an Orb of Storms, stand near it. And then when the boss is going to spawn, you pop your Mana Tempest. And you want to just go ham. I almost rarely use Mana Tempest now. I do enough damage where I don't need it. But early on in your gearing process, you might find the need to use Mana Tempest. Just be warned that your mana is your life. So if you're in Mana Tempest and you're on 0 mana, like this, and the boss hits you, you're probably gonna die because you have no life. Just be careful. Again, using conductivity on the boss, again, very nice. Speaking of different spells, what you want to do is assign your spells to a weapon slot. So I've assigned Spark to weapon set 1, Orb of Storms to weapon set 1, Conductivity to weapon set 2, Cast on Shock to both, Mana Tempest to 1, Archmage to 1, and Blink to 2. What this does is it divides your Spirit Reservation gems between both weapon sets, which means that when I use Conductivity as an example, you'll see my Spirit changes. And this allows me to reserve Blink instead of Archmage, so that I can Blink when I swap to my weapon set. And that's on Conductivity, so I don't have to press my weapon swap ability. I just curse a mob, Blink, go back to sparking on weapon set 1. It's a nice way to add Blink into your build without too much shenanigans, basically. Speaking of weapon set skills, you'll see here that some of them are sort of reddish and some of them are green. What this is doing is when I weapon swap, it's activating all of the curse effect nodes so that I can curse mobs with higher curse effect with Conductivity on my weapon set 2. You can do the same thing for any ability, but for this build, it's useful to have more curse effect on your Conductivity just because it's just more damage. So you can set that by having 24 free passive skills unallocated. You then click this button and now you will assign skills to weapon set 1. You can do the same thing for weapon set 2. Once you've assigned them to each weapon set, you'll swap your weapons and you should see them swap correctly. That's how that works. I can't think of anything else to explain. If you guys have questions, please leave them in the comments below. I will do my best to answer them. I will most likely be streaming on Twitch, so feel free to stop by my stream and ask me there. I will be doing boss carries as per usual, maybe some mapping, and awaiting the nerf that is inevitably to come to this build. It's going to get demolished, and we will see where we can take the build from there. I'm assuming it's going to still be very good with the level of investment I've put into it, but remains to be seen. So we'll find out together. Hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend or your week. Happy holidays, and we'll see you soon. Ciao.